Banished is an indie city builder / colony sim game released in 2014 by Shining Rock Software. Unlike a lot of other city builders at the time, Banished incorporates a lot of survival elements into its gameplay, something that was fairly uncommon for 2014. It's one of those defining titles for the colony sim genre, even if that genre carries a fairly loose definition today. Either way, the impression Banished left means you'd be hard-pressed to find a city builder with survival elements today that doesn't immediately get compared to Banished. With that in the back of our minds, let's talk more about the game itself. As the name suggests, Banished is about a small group of settlers recently exiled from their homeland. Being isolated from the outside world, your job is to guide the population in building a brand new settlement from scratch. This does include the management of a few essential resources, like firewood and food. However, the primary resource of Banished is actually its people. Starting out, you may want to get to know everyone on a first-name basis. Are they happy? Healthy? What route do they take to work? Where do they live? This kind of information is great early game, but not super necessary late game. Besides, Banished is more of a colony management game anyway. Believe it or not, running a colony takes a lot of forward planning. Disasters could strike at any moment. It's a matter of keeping the population alive long enough to grow into a prosperous society. Let's talk a little bit about the game's presentation, starting with graphics. As you can tell, Banished has a simple, yet detailed, polygonal graphical style, not dissimilar to many of the early 2000s strategy games. Think Stronghold 2, but newer. It's that kind of graphical style that looks great from a distance, but a little rough up close. Not that it's a bad thing. This is a city building game after all. Building, smoke, citizens, it all adds up eventually. Some more graphically intense games might slow down late game, but Banished doesn't have this issue. Keeping on the topic of visuals, Banished probably has one of the cleanest user interfaces I've ever seen in a game. I mean, like, they only kept the essentials. The whole UI, everything. It's all contained in this one little bar. Sort of. As you can see, Banished uses a modular menu system, meaning you can open and move around the UI to your heart's content. What's nice is that not all the UI elements are essential, preventing the game space from feeling cluttered. Some of these submenus you are going to want to keep open though. We'll talk more about those ones later. For now though, this UI isn't without its flaws. Some of the symbols are incredibly similar. If a player keeps accidentally placing a forestry building every time they want to clear trees, that probably means your symbols are too similar. Oh goddammit. Banished also comes with a super pleasant soundscape. You never feel like you're not in the middle of the wildy. It's a particularly calming aesthetic, which extends to the music. It's all very atmospheric and folksy. It's not afraid to experiment a bit either. There's some very naturalistic tracks that you just don't hear in similar titles. Nestled among these sounds is the ever-present sound of production. The claying of tools, felling of trees, it's never far behind. I do wish there was some variation in these sounds however, as most of the productions use the same claying noise the stoneworkers use, so it can be hard to tell exactly what's going on just from listening. Before we start talking about gameplay, we should probably go over a few rudimentary settings. When creating a map, Banished has 2 terrain types to choose from. That may not sound like a lot, but each map is randomly generated from a seed, so it's rarely an issue. It's more of a difficulty setting anyway, since it's harder to expand settlements when there's mountains in the way. On top of this, you're given 3 starting difficulties. These just determine how many supplies you start with. You can also adjust weather conditions to make it more or less temperate, and toggle disasters on and off. It's not a ton of options mind you, but the game really doesn't need them. And you could always look up a seed that provides a more difficult experience. Although, it would be nice if the game provided a slider for a more difficult world generation. Like I said before, the game is often described as a survival city builder, with the emphasis on survival. So how do you do that? The first thing you should be doing each playthrough is opening this menu. This is the Professions menu. You're going to want to get pretty familiar with this. The Professions menu lets you assign tasks and keep track of who's doing what. You can also see how many workers each profession can maintain. The more workers assigned to a task, the more productive they are. By default, citizens entering the workforce are placed in the laborer category. Laborers really are a people bank. If a worker dies of old age, or a preventable workplace accident, a laborer will immediately be put in to replace them. As such, you'll always want to keep at least a few laborers around. This is especially the case if you have a quarry. That place honestly might be cursed. Knowing this, you might be tempted to inflate your population to counter all the deaths. Yeah, don't do that. The return on productive citizens takes a long time. Kids don't work. Worse, they still need food and warmth. You can't just send Timmy into the forest and say, good luck. Kids will eat you out of house and home. Civilization was already barely hanging on, now the problem's worse. Remember, Banished is very survival oriented. If you're gonna make food vampires, you're gonna have to do some forward planning. You better get working on it though. Move too slowly and you could be met with an aging population. Like real life, they'll eventually reach a point where they can't have kids. If this happens, the game is practically over. Just managing a population can be a huge balancing act. This problem only gets worse once winter sets in. Crops don't grow during winter, and homes need a constant stream of firewood. It's an ever-present skill test that looms over the player. If there's cracks in your city, winter is when they'll appear. Is worker travel time impacting food production? Maybe food sheds are too far away. It's small stuff like this that may not seem like a big deal in the moment, but this kind of issue builds over time. On top of this, towns may be struck with a sudden disaster. Illness or crop disease can stifle production or food supplies. You could be okay in the moment, but will you have enough for winter? What about something more deadly, like a fire or tornado? If the town is too compact, there may be nothing left. If you spread out too much, there won't be enough forest for herbs and medicine. Rarely will you find a point of equilibrium. Playing Banished is a near constant balancing act. While I'm a big fan of how survival-oriented Banished is, the game really suffers from a lack of advancement. Most city builders have some kind of long-term goal, or a technology to unlock. Banished doesn't have any of this. It ends up being purely a bid for survival, without any kind of end goal. This lack of direction can make the game feel aimless at times. Although I have seen people argue in support of that. It could be the perfect game to play on a break, or just out of boredom. You're only really there to have fun and build something cool after all. If you still find the game limiting, Banished has a ton of workshop mods available. In most cases, these can be either small changes or entire overhauls. You definitely don't need mods to enjoy this game, but it can extend the shelf life. Overall, Banished does a good job at balancing strategy-focused gameplay, with gameplay that can feel relaxing and cathartic at times. Building a town in a new frontier can be fun. Balancing resources and population, the constant threat of winter, and looming disasters make the game genuinely challenging at times. I can see why so many games have chosen to follow in its footsteps, and why so many of its ideas are still being propagated in newer titles. If you have time to check it out, or even remotely like city builders, you should definitely give it a shot. Well, that's all for now. As always, I'll leave a link to my original article in the description. The next game is either going to be SteamWorld Dig or Lake, so I'll see you then.
These look like bills.